Greetings from Highlights from the Hill.
Good evening. I will be giving highlights from Sunday's lesson for December 14th, 2025, Lesson 2. We're studying from our winter quarter, Unit 1, Our Holy God and the Holy Scriptures. The devotional reading is taken from Ephesians 1st chapter, verses 3 through 10. Our background scriptures are Exodus 34th chapter, verses 4 through 7, Psalm 103, verses 1 through 5 and 10 through 14, Isaiah 40th chapter, verses 27 through 31, Matthew the 6th chapter, verses 24 through 34, John 3rd chapter, verses 3 through 6, the 4th chapter, verses 20 through 24, and the 8th chapter, verses 40 through 47, Romans 2nd chapter, verses 2 through 11, and the 8th chapter, verses 14 through 17, and 1st John 4th chapter, verses 7 through 16. Our printed text is Matthew the 6th chapter, verses 24 through 34. Key verse: Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Matthew the 6th chapter, 34th verse, from the New International Version. Our subject: letting go of worry. Lesson aims. As a result of experiencing this lesson, the participants should be able to do the following. Number one, survey the totality of God's provisions for the needs of humankind. Number two, trust God to such an extent that they are released from their worries. And number three, give thanks for God's provisions and help those in the community who do not have their basic needs met. There are two outlines for this lesson. The first outline is the cost of materialism, and the second outline is the remedy for materialism. Now, as we take a look at the biblical context of this lesson, we find that Matthew, a former tax collector called Levi, and now a disciple of Jesus Christ, is the author of this gospel book that bears his name. It is the first of the four gospel books in the New Testament, and it describes Jesus as the long-awaited Messiah for the Jews. Where much discussion has been given to the date of his writings, some have dated his composition as early as AD 50. We also find that Matthew 6, today's lesson, is the second of three chapters that records Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he outlines and defines core values for the life of his followers then and his believers today in his own words, offering to us a direct window into his heart and into his teachings. Now, in today's lesson, we will see how Jesus' teachings give us a powerful solution to not sweat the small stuff by letting go of worry and by seeking first things first. He also gives us as believers the assurance of his awareness of our needs, along with the power and ability to meet those needs if and when we would but put our trust in him. Now we'll take a look at that first outline, the cost of materialism, verses 24 through 30. I'm going to read those verses from the New International Version, beginning with verse 24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. Verse 30. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? We see Jesus here speaking directly to our being anxious over material needs. He is reminding us that worrying over money and possessions can and will cost us from putting our total trust in God. He begins this portion of his sermon by stating, no one can serve two masters, God and money. That this divided loyalty forces us to favor one master over the other. And our true allegiance belongs to God and God alone. For we cannot be devoted to both. There is a cost in trying to be loyal to both God and materialism. And since materialism itself will require much of our attention by worrying, if we are not careful, it will keep us from giving our full service to God. So, Jesus teaches us to not worry about life. This material stuff, what you will eat, what you will drink, or even what you will wear. In other words, don't be anxious about the basic needs of life. After all, worrying or being anxious cannot add nothing to our lives. And if we are not careful, worrying or being anxious can and will prevent us from serving God with our all. Jesus then draws their attention to how God provides for the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. And he replies, if God can provide for and take care of the things of nature, then surely he will care for us, who is of much more value than they. Jesus' point is, when we set our hearts on materialism, our loyalty shifts away from God and will undermine our total trust in his provisions. So, he calls us as believers to recognize that the most basic need for our life is not what we wear, not what we eat, nor where we live, but the basic need for our life is God. When our lives are free from worrying about material things, then we are free to worship God and to live for him. For when our lives are lived in worship, rather than in worry. It will not only help us, but it will help those around us to also become transformed according to God's perfect will, plan, and purpose for our lives. Our takeaway from this outline is guard your attitude by replacing worry with worship. Now we'll take a look at that last outline, the remedy of materialism. And it covers verses 31 through 34. Again, from the New International Version, verse 31. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Verse 34. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Here we see that even though fear and anxiety are natural human reactions, God does not want his children to respond in this matter, especially when it relates to our basic needs. So Jesus gives us our response, our remedy for material things. He tells us to trust God rather than allowing anxiety to distract us from serving God faithfully. And as God's children, we have a Father who is fully aware of our needs, and he is also faithful to provide those needs when we put our trust in him. For our remedy for letting go of worry is to seek first things first. That means when we align our lives with God's values as we reflect his character and trust him to supply what we need to fulfill his will for our lives, when pleasing God become our highest aim, he assures us we will have what we need to carry out his purpose. Listen to Jesus, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. For when pleasing God become our first priority, his promise is we will have what is necessary to carry out his purpose. He then teaches us that instead of borrowing from the future's problems, learn to live in the right now. For worrying about tomorrow is fruitless, and it only shows a lack of faith on our part. Since God knows what we need, and he has the wherewithal to provide those needs, then our focus should be centered on doing his will, his way, and having an obedient relationship with him. Then the writer of our lesson says, and I quote, as believers, we can demonstrate the faith required for righteous living and then become fully available for his kingdom mission. So, the question for us today is, as believers in 2025, how can we manage our worries as we go through life's ups and downs in our daily need for materialism? When and if we as believers become consumed with acquiring and holding on to stuff rather than trusting God for our needs, we begin to sin against God. And he is the only one God is the only one worthy of our total love and devotion. We're called to trust God and God alone. Now, this does not mean as believers we cannot own material goods, but what it does mean is we must not allow those material things to take first place in our lives where we block out our devotion to God. In closing, for believers, the key to helping us to let go of worry lies in our choice of the right master. We must make a conscious effort to seek God's kingdom and His righteousness above everything else. And then we must completely trust God to supply our every need rather than relying on our material wealth or as our security and as our satisfaction. Listen, church, we are being cautioned. We are being warned today to stop our needless worry about our basic needs. As we seek God's kingdom and His righteousness, our first challenge is to position our lives with God's purpose and way for us as individuals. For us to stop our needless worries, it does not begin nor end only with our trusting God for our needs, but it also extends to our being hands and feet to help in meeting the needs of others. For as believers, we must choose to put God's kingdom first. Then we must trust Him to not only meet our needs, but we must also depend on Him to help us become those instruments of His provisions for others. For there is more to this life than worrying about daily needs. So remember this: when we can trust God for our provisions and focus on His kingdom, then we can let go of worry from the distractions of materialistic concerns. In other words, let go and let God. I thank you for listening. Good evening. And I invite you to come and share with us on Sunday morning at 9:15 as we go in depth into this Sunday school lesson, letting go of worry.